Is the Bible a reliable source of truth? Presented by Bill Flavell. I'll start with the assumption that we all want to believe things that are true and not to believe things that are not true. I trust we all subscribe to that view. Imagine if most Christians you bump into said, "I'm a Christian, but I'm only 10% sure God exists." Or imagine if parents told their children, "There may be a God who sent his son to save us, but I'm only 5% sure that's true." Of course, religions don't work that way. Most Christians will say they're 100% sure God exists, or almost 100% sure. Some even say they're 1,000% sure, whatever that means. We humans are used to thinking about probabilities, and we assign probabilities according to the evidence we have. For example, if you're buying a second-hand car and the seller assures you the car had a full service a week ago, you might just wonder if it's true. On the other hand, if the seller can produce a receipt for the service, your confidence level will go up. It's interesting to think about how we assign probabilities and what kinds of things we can be fairly sure about and what we can be less sure about. 0% confidence is when you cannot say whether a thing is true or not. This could be because you've got no evidence either way, or you can't trust the evidence that you have. You might be 100% confident that something is true if you had all the evidence you need from reliable sources and it showed it must be true and could not be false. In practice, though, this almost never happens because there is always some room for doubt. Your confidence would be minus 100% if you have evidence that shows something must be false. This happens a lot. It's much easier to prove something false with contradictory evidence than it is to prove it true. Of course, there are graduations between these extremes. At plus 50% confidence, you may have insufficient evidence or have doubts about the reliability of the evidence. At 50% reliability, you judge it is more likely for a thing to be true than untrue, but that is as much as you can confidently say. Let's make a list of categories of things. At the top of my list would be scientific laws. Laws are mathematical descriptions of how nature works. For example, Ohm's law describes how the electrical current in a circuit varies according to the voltage applied and the resistance of the circuit. Every electrical device you have was designed using Ohm's law. It works everywhere on the planet, in every electrical device from the most powerful generators to the smallest microcircuits. It works on board Voyager 1, the craft that's travelled further from Earth than any other. That's over 21 billion kilometers and counting. From trillions of electrical circuits, we have never found a single case where Ohm's law did not work. Ohm's law, like other scientific laws, seems to be universally true. So we can be very confident that Ohm's law is true, but not quite 100%. It works every time we test it, but maybe we could test it one day and find it doesn't work. We don't know if that will ever happen, but we can't prove that it won't. That's why we can't be 100% confident. Perhaps we could say we are 99.9999999% confident that Ohm's law is universally true. There are dozens of scientific laws, and most of them have been successfully tested a vast number of times. So let's start our list. Our confidence that scientific laws are true is approaching 100%. My next category is scientific theories. Scientific theories are well-tested explanations for things we observe in nature. For example, cell theory in biology explains that all living organisms are made of one or more cells, and that all tissues an organism has are basically the same cell. This theory is very well established and has never been proven false. In general, for scientific theories that are widely accepted today, we can say they've been tested many thousands of times by different scientists using different methods. 2, they've never failed a test, and 3, they have been proven useful in practical application. How much confidence can we have in scientific theories? It depends. Some theories like general relativity and quantum mechanics we can test in many different ways, and we can measure the results very, very precisely. So we can achieve confidence levels approaching scientific laws. Other theories relate to events that occurred in the distant past, and we cannot repeat those events. We just have to rely on whatever evidence we can find. We can still test such theories, and we can still accumulate a substantial body of evidence, but we have to accept overall our confidence level will be lower. So I'll give scientific theories a range from 95% to approaching 100%. But what about history? Let's start with recent events. For example, if you believe the father who raised you was your biological father, how sure can you be? You probably can't be completely sure. Did your mother have a secret boyfriend? Was she raped? You don't know, and she's probably not going to say. Even your mother can't be completely sure. There may have been a mix-up at the hospital, or she may have been seeing two men at the same time. However, if you have a DNA test, your confidence level will get close to 100%. Your confidence depends on the evidence. I'll give recent events a range from 0%, where there is no good evidence, to 99.9%, where there's good evidence. So let's turn to events that happened a long time ago. Let's go back 1600 years or so. Was Socrates a real person? Socrates was a brilliant philosopher, sometimes given the title of the father of philosophy. But what evidence is there that he existed? He never wrote anything, and there are no historical records and no artifacts that show he was real. Three people wrote about him: Plato, Xenophon, and Aristophanes. They all claim to have been Socrates' students, so they were his contemporaries. Plato wrote by far the most about Socrates. Plato liked to write dialogues to illustrate philosophical points, and he used Socrates as the protagonist who asked smart questions to make his points. If we take this at face value, we have three students using their brilliant teacher in their work. But there are other possible explanations. Maybe Plato invented Socrates, much as you would invent a character in a play. Maybe Xenophon and Aristophanes were in on the joke and used the same character in their work. Honestly, we can't be sure. Finding evidence for historical figures is always difficult, especially those from distant history. Did the Buddha really exist? What about Homer, who supposedly wrote the Iliad? Was Robin Hood a real character? You may have opinions, but you cannot have certainty. We have the most confidence when people left evidence in the form of writing, art, official records, and so on, where many contemporaries wrote about them, where the stories told were consistent, where there were no motivations for people to invent or embellish stories, and so on. Again, we need a range of confidence levels to cover all ancient events. I'll put it at 0% for the least evidenced events, and 90% for the most evidenced. Now let's look at supernatural events. Let's take the example of the god Agni. He lusted after the wives of 7 sages, but he could not have them. Svaha was a granddaughter of Lord Brahma. Svaha loved Agni, so to soothe Agni's lust, she transformed herself into each of the sages' wives and had sex with Agni as each wife. This story from Hindu scripture is believed to be true by many Hindus, but thought to be myth by others. What confidence can we have that it's true? All we have is the story in the revered Matsya Purana. There is no other evidence. I have a hard time going above 0% confidence. We would need very good evidence indeed to believe such an extraordinary story. We could look at hundreds of supernatural stories and come to the same conclusion. There is not enough evidence to make them even slightly convincing. Let's look at the Bible story in Joshua chapter 10. In this story, God answered Joshua's prayer for the sun and moon to stand still for a full day. For that to have happened, the earth would have to have stopped rotating fairly abruptly, and the moon would have to stop orbiting the planet, which would make it fall rapidly to Earth. Imagine coming to an abrupt halt whilst travelling at some 1,000 miles per hour. Think of the massive earthquakes around the entire globe and the mother of all tsunamis. Even if God had somehow managed to cancel these physical effects, people around the globe would have noticed, but no one did. What if 3 well-known and learned Greek philosophers saw the sun stop in the sky and wrote a story about it? Would it then be believable? I don't think so. We would need much more evidence for such an event. We can't even be sure that a fellow philosopher they wrote about actually existed. Even when there's a lot of evidence that an event actually happened, there remains a huge problem to be sure an event was supernatural rather than natural but difficult to explain. Imagine a man is close to death suffering from cancer and the family set up a prayer vigil. If the man recovers against all expectations, can we be sure the family's prayers were answered? Well, of course we can't. There are other possible explanations and we have no way of knowing which one is true. There has not been a single supernatural story that has been scientifically established as true beyond reasonable doubt, or even probably true, ever. The truth is, right now, we have no way to determine that an event was supernatural. So today, our confidence that an event was supernatural cannot exceed 0%. Where there is contrary evidence, our confidence level might fall to minus 100%. Let's move on to the Bible then. The Bible is a combination of ancient events and supernatural events. So according to my scale, the maximum confidence we can have is up to 90% for the historical parts and 0% for the supernatural parts. Let's consider the founding story of the Jewish exodus from Egypt to Canaan. This is essentially an ancient event, although of course it has many supernatural episodes. But let's ignore those for now. What evidence is there that the Israelites took a 40-year trip to Canaan? There's none. But there is evidence of Israelites living around Canaan that predates the Exodus. Scholars and archaeologists almost all agree that the Exodus did not happen. It is commonly described as the founding myth of Judaism. This is an example of an event that we can have no confidence in. To be fair, there are some events and some places that we can be more confident about in the Bible, but in general, biblical archaeology is coming up largely empty-handed. How then can millions of people believe the Bible is mostly true, or in some cases believe it's 100% true? There is only one way, and that is to rely on faith. The problem is, 2 people can believe contradictory things on faith. Faith cannot distinguish between the truth and fantasy. Faith allows you to believe anything. If you believe on faith, it is not because you really want to be sure something is true. It's because you just want to believe it.